Professor Papa, could you tell us about Dr. Miraglia, his studies and his medical activity?
Thank you very much. How can you tell a wise man from a fool? This question was posed by the prosecutor to Dr. Biagio Miraglia. Miraglia enrolled in the Neapolitan Medical School and graduated in 1837. The school was of a great scientific level due to the presence between the end of the 18th century and the first half of the 19th century of several European-level scientists, such as the medical physicist and naturalist Giuseppe Saverio Poli and the botanist Domenico Cirillo, respectively, home member and fellow of the Royal Society. Domenico Cotugno, who demonstrated the existence of the labyrinthine fluid and formulated the theory of resonance and hearing. In 1843, Miraglia was a doctor at the asylum of Aversa, directed by Linguiti, a great innovator in psychiatric therapy. Luigi Ferrarese also works in Aversa, which had already published in 1836 memoirs on the phrenological doctrine. Miraglia was director of the asylum from 1860 to 1869. To clearly understand the meaning of the phrenology according to Miraglia, I invite you to read the first sentence of the preamble in the book Questions Treated with the Principles of the Physiology of the Brain of 1883, dedicated to Franz Gall. Miraglia says, the brain, as an organ of human faculties, is not a single and homogeneous organ, but rather a complex of parts, of which the special functions give rise to particular manifestation, for which the intellectual faculties are operated, moral and instinctive. It not only differentiates between them, but also differentiates and independent of each other. And next, Miraglia affirms, the brain is the organ of the soul and the spirit, and that in its functions in the origin, manifestation and exercise of all the faculties of the mind. Therefore, the functions of this organ and of each of its parts, of which observation and induction explain the relationship with intellectual, moral and instinctive phenomena, constituting the physiology of the brain or phrenology. Please, let me say that these statements implying the panpsychism could be part of a report dealing with today integrated information theory.
Well, what were the innovations introduced in the care of the patients of Morotofrio of Aversa?
To answer, I could, of course, cite publications of Miraglia, documents of the asylum of Aversa, but I prefer to read a few sentences from the book Jacques Horty, Les Feux du Docteur Miraglia, by Alexandre Dumas of 1867. Dumas in 1867 writes, "Let me give you an account of one of the most extraordinary shows I have ever seen, and I can even say that we have ever seen. A dramatic performance performed by fools. And noticed well, this is the third time that these same madmen, under the direction of Dr. Miraglia, have given performances in Naples, and with such success as in Naples, where the actors, even those who have talent, do not make a penny. Our fools, every time they play, have a full house. Once, the first, they played Alfieri's Brutus. The other two times, they played the Bourgeois de Gand. The Bourgeois de Gand, do you hear, my dear Roman? You whom I have not seen for perhaps 25 years in Paris, your Bourgeois de Gand, forgotten in Paris, by actors who believe themselves to be wise. Some fools play it here and make it applaud with frenzy. This is Dumas.
So, we know that Dr. Miraglia observed the behavior of his patients for years, and some of his main publications were born from this observation. For example, the outlines of a new classification, a new statistic of mental alienation based on phrenological principles considered in their relationship with brain pathology. What were the main reflection and the conclusion that Miraglia reached?
The work arises from a specific question: the classification of mental alienations derived from clinical facts must be confirmed by pathological anatomy. Miraglia studies 54 cases. His axiom is: the faculties of the spirit can only be manifested through an organic brain function. He associated each clinical case with detailed necropsy results. Miraglia concludes, the exact idea of mental alienations cannot be conceived without referring them to the primitive lesion of the fundamental brain faculties. Madness is an absolute consequence of alterations in the functions of the brain organs. I compare the state of disturbance of the faculties with the apparent degree of development of the cerebral organs. It's more than enough.
Could you describe the interest in phrenology and the practical application that Miraglia experienced?
Obviously, the phrenological belief is the paramount when he states, hence the need to consider the disease of the mind is indirect reason of the volume, number and activity of brain organs. But Miraglia has also a biological vision when he states that it overexcites in its fibromolecular movements. Miraglia classifies the alienations by genes such as mania, melancholy, dementia, and for each of these different species. His modernity is also evident in the therapeutic approach when he states to undertake the most convenient treatment of mental alienations, whether psychic or somatic prophylaxis could be the more appropriate, whether a moral or physical therapy should be preferred, and in which cases to use them. The phrenological vision is overwhelming, of course, in Miraglia, but it also allows him to affirm, therefore, there are as many memories, as many attentions, as there are fundamental faculties. Miraglia seems to affirm the multimodality of each state of mind, as stated by the Nobel Prize Gerhard Edelman in his beautiful Wider Than Sky. Miraglia was the last of the phrenologists, but he was undoubtedly a great psychiatrist, especially in the analysis and in relationship with the patients, as when he described the experience with the microcephalic. He says, one day, in delighting in my caresses, he brought his head to my chest, and amazed he looked at me, laughed, and brought his head back to my chest. I found that the sonic fluctuations of my watch had aroused his attention.
Regarding the case of Giuditta Guastamacchia, can you tell us the story of this woman and the murder she organized?
Science communication, when it meets a character like Giuditta Guastamacchia, the result of overlay. Few true, many only legends. To be science must make a choice. Considering that the 14 files of the process studied by Miraglia no longer exist, our choice was to report just the information found in the scientific work made by Miraglia and by this interviewer at that time, Alexandre Dumas. You will have the privilege of creating your personal Giuditta. A girl born in a rural area in the deep south of Italy of poor parents, Giuditta was an adolescent beautiful, with a lovely feature and bright eyes. Like any teenager, especially in culturally and economically poor environments, she had several early relationships, perhaps raped, but she had fallen in love with Stefano Daniello. Her father, Nicola, gave her in marriage to an elderly man to circumscribe the scandal, but this man died. Due to his status as prelate, not being able to continue the relationship, Daniello fled to Naples. But after 4 months, Giuditta found him and joined him again. Giuditta's father comes to Naples, finds Giuditta, and takes her to the court. Here Giuditta denies knowing her father. But having ascertained the truth, the judge imprisons her in the prison of Santa Maria Agnone and then transfers her to the monastery of Sant'Antonio alla Vicaria. The lover, the prelate Stefano Daniello, devises a stratagem to free his mistress Giuditta. Daniello asks his 16-year-old nephew, Domenico Altamura, poor, idle, and dissipated, to marry Giuditta in exchange for a salary. And as Miraglia says, so Giuditta had a husband for the second time, to veil her lust. The second husband wants Giuditta to break off the relationship with her lover. Giuditta proposes to Daniello to kill him, but this one proposes to blame him for some crime and imprison him. However, the story continued for 4 years, until 1800, when it happens that Giuditta's father, in prison for debt, asked for help. Daniello, the lover, pays the debts, but involved the father in the criminal scheme. Meanwhile, Giuditta also had a relationship with the surgeon De Sandoli, who was involved in the murder. Miraglia says of him, this young surgeon, we don't know if more stupid than ferocious, was one of those born to outrage nature and to prey of the gallows. The last figure recruited was the assassin, Michele Sorbo, according to Miraglia, expert in these matters of blood, of which he was often stained with great disinterest. The husband was strangled by the assassin and dissected into parts by the surgeon. His head was boiled by Giuditta. Part of the limbs was thrown by her father in a cloaca. The killer, with the remaining limbs, was intercepted by the police, dropped them, and was arrested on March 23rd. The accomplices were alerted by the delay, they understood, and they tried to dispose of other parts during the night. In the morning, Miraglia writes, a dog was seen eating a human skull, and it was immediately known that human limbs were still scattered around town. All were arrested, and Miraglia says, the confessions, especially that of Giuditta, demonstrate the innate ferocity of their heart. No remorse, no repentance. In the early months of 1800 in Naples, after the period of the Neapolitan Republic, with the return of the Bourbons, the military code was in force. Therefore, this was a trial without defense and texts. And on April 16, 1800, the sentence was issued. Miraglia says, he condemned the criminals to be dragged through the streets and to die on the fork, and to be the heads affixed to the walls of the Vicaria. Only Daniello, being a prelate, was sentenced to be imprisoned for life in the Favignana pit. Giuditta was 32 years old.
So, phrenological opinion on the skulls of the famous Giuditta Guastamacchia, her father and other accomplices, great criminals executed in Naples in April 1800, is the result of the study conducted by Miraglia on the case of Giuditta. In your opinion, Professor, why did Dr. Miraglia took an interest in this murder, and how did he approach the study of this affair that took place 60 years earlier?
Well, Marie Blanche Whitman is known as one of the hysteria patients of Jean-Martin Charcot. She was treated by Charcot from 1877 until his death in 1893. Scholars have disagreed as to whether the Whitman suffered from epileptic seizure, from hysteria, or was merely feigning symptoms. Giuditta Guastamacchia is the Whitman of Miraglia. We can well say that Biagio Miraglia is the man who invented Giuditta Guastamacchia. Miraglia, like Charcot, needed an extreme case to support the phrenological approach. Here is Giuditta's invention, the irrefutable proof of specific properties of the brain. Miraglia defines it a tremendous fact, unique perhaps in the history of crimes, for the circumstances and for the long and tenacious premeditation of many years. These statements clearly support the directly proportional relationship between the sides of a brain organ responsible for a sharp and specific behavior. Indeed, Miraglia concludes the destructive instinct, exaggerated by nature, dominated the spirit of those individuals. How Miraglia had the skulls once again is reported in a journalistic style by Alexandre Dumas. He says, in 1855, during the restoration works of Castel Capuano, Miraglia was taking care of the daughter of the prefect of Naples. While taking care of her, asked the patient's father to give him a gift of some skulls of criminals displayed in nailed cages to the walls of Castel Capuano. He relied on the fact that this was a remnant of barbarism that had to disappear with the others. The prefect made some difficulties, saying that this remnant of barbarism was maintained by two French governments in Naples, but in the end, seduced by the idea of doing better than Napoleon and Murat had done, he gave the order to remove the cages and heads they contained from the walls of Castel Capuano. Happy to finally have the coveted treasure, Miraglia analyzed the skulls, sorted them and divided them into categories. 4 close cages bearing the same date announced that the 4 heads separated from the trunk on the same day belonged to the perpetrators and accomplices of the same crime. Miraglia studied the 4 skulls. He recognized that the first was that of a woman aged 32 or to 34.
What were his conclusion on the study of the skulls of the Vicaria?
Well, there are over 100 books on Amazon in which the term neuroethics appears in the title. In PubMed, there are more than 32,000 reports. Well, we can say now one more. Miraglia, in his consideration, affirms the true observation of the facts confirms this principle of evaluating the conscience of the evildoers in order to investigate the origin of the fault with the less difficulty. And then it concludes, forensic phrenology promises itself the perfection of the human heart. For it, the degrees of culpability of the actions will be recognized as effects of an agitated individual, and for this, the correction and amendment will be the sole purpose of the punishment. And thus, justice becomes the active protection of innocence.
Thank you, Professor.
Thank you to all of you, and good luck. Ciao.
Ciao.